Choosing how to invest our limited resources is one of the most important things that product managers do. Today on Product Coffee, we're going to look at a few things product managers at growth companies do differently from all the rest. As we look at different types of companies, there are companies that are growing in revenue, and that's kind of the thing that most companies are really focused on is we want to grow our revenue, right? That's why we're here. We're going to generate revenue. And there are some companies that are doing that successfully, and there are some companies that aren't. They're either very stagnant, maybe they've been around for a little while, or maybe they're even declining and they're kind of starting to fall off. And one of the things that we'll talk about today is some of the characteristics of the companies that are growing versus the ones who are declining or at least stagnating. But before we do that, I wanted to ask a question. I'm going to launch a poll here, and I'm going to ask the question, when you're thinking about your product investments and how you want to invest in initiatives, what do you think, and I'm going to give you a list, what do you think are the three most important inputs to consider as you're prioritizing your investments? I'm going to share the results out just so that everybody can see how we answered. And it looks like the number one vote getter was strategic goals. People look at people kind of generally agreed that focusing on strategic goals as a key input was a top priority. What did we have for number two? It looks like direct customer feedback was number two, followed by key financial targets. It looks like key financial targets. And then we had a real drop off and drop down to market research, then down to competitive intelligence and feedback from stakeholders outside of product management. And then we dropped way down to partner and channel requirements, direction from senior executives, and internal perspectives on customer needs. What I want to do next is I want to switch over and talk about a study that Gartner did. Gartner recently did a survey. It was actually late last year that they did the survey, but they interviewed and surveyed 200 product management leaders from various companies, and the survey was pretty interesting. They've got quite a few assets that they created from it that give some insights as to what they learned, and one of them is this ebook. And if you'd like a copy of this ebook, it's free. It's on the resources page that I shared out for those who just joined. You can go to productcoffee.com/resources, and there will be a link to download this book as well. And they identified some of the best practices, some of the characteristics of companies that are actually growing in revenue versus those who are declining or stagnating in revenue. And I wanted to specifically look at the investment priorities. They covered a few different topics in the ebook, but one of the there were two particularly interesting topics that I really wanted to focus on. And the first was around investments themselves. How do we choose which investments to make? When it comes down to it, there's not a product manager. I'm going to assert this, and somebody can feel free to jump in and call me a liar. I'm going to assert that there's not a product manager in this call who is dealing with a situation where they have more resources to get things done than they have ideas and things that they want to do. Is there anyone that has an overabundance of resources? I don't hear anybody jumping in yet. So we have to prioritize, and we've got some good ideas and we got some not as good ideas, but we need to figure out how to prioritize those investments. So what Gartner did is they pulled their survey results around the question about how do you prioritize your investment decisions, and they used and I used the same question that they did, or roughly the same question that they did, and they broke the respondents down by growth companies and non-growth companies or organizations, I guess. There were clearly more growth organizations responding, which I kind of think is not surprising, since I think forward-thinking, growing organizations are more likely to be engaging with analysts on an ongoing basis and participating in a survey like this. But one of the things that they agreed on both growth and non-growth companies, both of them have placed a heavy prioritization on strategic goals, which we all did as well. So that was a pretty common theme. What was more interesting is where they really differed. And the orange bars here represent answers that came in with a high degree of confidence. And I'm not going to get into all into statistical significance and confidence intervals on this call right now, because frankly, it hurts my brain when you really start digging in it. It's a complex topic. That being said, there were a couple of answers both from growth companies and from non-growth companies that were so consistently, it had such consistent responses. We got a high level of confidence that these are key characteristics that differentiate the two. And so let's take a look first at the non-growth companies. And the characteristic that they observed was that within these non-growth companies, they tended to see a lot of product managers prioritizing financial goals and direction from senior executives as some of the top inputs to how we're going to invest. In the 60-second business case, I've spoken in the past about how you build that case quickly to combat the highest paid person in the room, that big loud voice that says, I'm in charge, this is the way we should go, and how you bring a very fast but data-driven approach to combating that discussion. That seems to be a real issue with companies that are stagnating, when you have executives and leaders who are overpowering and the company is quite internally focused. When you say it that way, it's not all that surprising that you see these characteristics. But conversely, as we look at the growth companies, they're really focused outwardly. They're focused on that direct customer feedback. And as they dug a little bit deeper, we found that growth companies tend to have really intentional, strong voice of the customer programs, as they do really robust, intentional market research. Now, both growth and non-growth companies do some of this, but these were really confident characteristics of the growth companies. I thought that was pretty interesting. But I wanted to kind of validate that, because one of the things that the ebook doesn't do is it doesn't give examples of companies that are living this. So I went and I looked at, one of my favorite lists, if you want to talk about growth companies, is the Inc. 5000. The company that was number one in the last edition of the Inc. 5000 is an Atlanta company called OneTrust. OneTrust grew something like 43,000%, I think it was, over the last 3 years. Massive growth. And is currently got a valuation based on some recent investments of about $2.7 billion. And the CEO of OneTrust is passionately customer focused. And if you look at his activities and the way they've built that company, he was at AirWatch years ago. And while he was working on the product portfolio at AirWatch, he really started to observe from the market some trends that he felt like were opportunities, and began to validate those ideas with existing AirWatch customers. He even got permission to go build some capabilities around employee privacy, as AirWatch was focused on mitigating risk for devices. He also built some products really designed to protect employee privacy in this. And as he left AirWatch and had been to a few conferences, realized that there was a bigger opportunity out there in the market for around privacy management. This was a coming trend that wasn't going to change. And so he went whole hog and started a company specifically designed to manage, to help enterprises manage consumer and customer privacy more effectively. And he says over the last 3 years, he's put over 1 million miles in the air, visiting customers, getting feedback, talking about the problems that they have, and bringing potential solutions and kind of validating and growing the company. So those are some characteristics that very specifically in the Inc. 5000 write-up, he focused very heavily on explaining, here's why we're successful. So there's the number one fastest growing company in the world, privately held company in the world for the last 3 years, or over the last 3 years, is OneTrust from Atlanta, demonstrating these very specific characteristics. And you can go out to the Inc. website, and some of the articles are available for free. You can actually pull the write-up on OneTrust and read that for yourself. It was a really great read and encouraging from a product management perspective and thinking about the way to prioritize investments. I want to switch gears a little bit then and move away from the investment prioritization decisions and talk about what that looks like in action. And so we've decided on some investment priorities, and we think we know where we want to invest, but then there are some steps that we're going to take before we actually go into development. And similarly, they did there was a question and some research in this survey around the pre-development activities before we actually commit the dollars to development. We've prioritized our investments, but now it's time to actually say go. And there were a few key differences once again between, and the differences are actually pretty significant in how growth organizations evaluate and plan and look at the potential work versus those stagnant or declining organizations. And one of the things that jumps off the page to you immediately here is we still went back to using the orange bars for the high confidence answers. And so one of the things that is immediately apparent as you look at this is that the growth organizations had quite a few answers with high confidence. So there was pretty strong agreement among product leaders from growth organizations on some of these key factors and priorities and kind of where they fall in the priority landscape. So I want to start kind of at the top here. And one of the things that's important to notice is that both growth and declining organizations do share some characteristics, and they've all kind of viewed some standard activities as pretty important. They do engineering sizing, they plan their projects, they look at resource availability and resource planning. They all do competitive analysis. They had kind of a pretty strong response that competitive analysis was a pre-development activity. And they all do some sort of validation with internal stakeholders at least. But the growth product managers do all that and then some more. And one of the first things that you'll notice is with a very high degree of agreement, they really focus on market sizing. And one of the quotes from that OneTrust article I was talking to you about just a moment ago is that, hey, we saw a massive market that had nothing but opportunity for growth for years to come. Consumer privacy was just starting to become a legislated issue in Europe, and it's going to spread to a global landscape very quickly. And it's going to be a requirement that is placed on enterprises that forces massive re-engineering of their products very quickly, and they're going to have to respond. So they saw a huge market opportunity, and one of the keys here, as we're thinking about our investments and our development planning, is we have to make sure before we invest in anything that there's actually somebody out there to buy our product. We can be really passionate about consumer privacy, but if there's nobody there to buy the product, then we can build all day long, and we're just going to be having fun building some software that we're passionate about. In the OneTrust case, though, we were really looking at, there is a market of enterprises that have a ton of consumer data and individual data, and they are about to be forced very rapidly to take new actions and to mask that data and protect that data in ways that their systems aren't fundamentally designed to do. There is a market there that has no choice but to do some business with someone who is going to be solving this problem. Another big point of difference is that validation concept. And the winners, the growing companies, don't just validate the solutions, don't just validate the products and the technologies that they're building. They also validate that the problem is actually a problem worth solving. I noticed the other day there was an article that the leadership of Quibi, one of the new streaming networks, is saying, oh, we're evaluating some strategic alternatives. Basically, they're not making their numbers. They're not attracting the subscribers they expected to subscribe, they expected to attract. And so they're rethinking their business. And what it comes down to, one of the analyses that I read is they didn't actually set out and solve a problem that anybody cared about. Yeah, they created another streaming network that had some content, sure, but there's a billion streaming networks out there. There's lots of content out there available. So they weren't doing something that was unique and special. And they're kind of one of the first ones to really start suffering from this rush to create our own private streaming service with our own content. Is, consumers are looking and say, hey, I got content. Give me something I don't have. Solve a problem that I've got. And they weren't. So, the notion of validating problems is one that I kind of latched onto as one of the big differentiators here between the companies. Validating solutions is intuitively obvious. Validating the problem is taking a step back and making sure it's part of that market sizing. Is there actually an audience and a customer base for me? Is the problem that I intend to solve really a valuable problem to that market?
Hey, Jason, this is Ida. So I'm in UX, and we see this a lot. So we will have product managers who want to usability test prototypes. So they're doing the solution validation, and the prototype, the solution is usable, right? Mm-hmm. It's intuitive. And then you get to the golden question at the end: would you use this product, service, whatever? And they're like, no.
Right.
And I mean, we're way down into the development cycle, and it just, two things happen. Either things come to a screeching halt, and it's back to the drawing board, or we just shove that solution through. Mm-hmm. We're like, it passed muster, it's usable, people can get through the flow, whatever, the funnel. Mm-hmm. And it just, I just see that time and time again as a UX professional. So
it's true. And I similarly have seen plenty of situations where we'll go down the path of developing a product, even developing a product or a feature or a capability that customers absolutely love. They say, oh, this is really fantastic. I love it. Well, would you pay for it? Oh,
no.
I have to pay for it? No. It's cool if it's free, but I'm not going to pay for it. And that's similarly, there's a problem, but maybe the problem isn't really a major problem. It's certainly not a problem that customers are willing to pay to solve. That's another side of the same coin. Any other examples that anybody wants to share?
Hey, Jason, this is Thiago. Hey, I think this is all related to that dilemma, outputs versus outcomes, right? Sometimes we go into these agile organizations and we have like a high demand for quick output, and there is no time invested into the problem. It's just validating solutions. As Ida was saying, you ask the UX team to build a prototype to do usability testing, when actually you should be, when you go down that path, you already have a solution. You already spent a lot of time on designing things that maybe is not solving the right problem. Mm-hmm. So I think that looking at this research, at this survey, yeah, I'm also not surprised that the time spent on validating the problem and the solution will really move the needle, because you remove the noise from creating a lot of outputs, and you really focus on what are the core actions, what is the core activity, right, that is going to deliver value for the user at the end of the day.
Thank you. Leaning a little bit towards this last topic that was one of the really high confidence answers, and what's interesting here is if you look at the difference here, the growth companies are really like 3 times more likely to be doing that, some sort of light prototyping, not fully building, but before they actually commit to investing dollars in development, they're doing some prototyping to help with that validation along the way. But they're validating that problem. They're placing a greater priority on validating the problem and solution in general, and the prototyping is a tool to validate the direction. I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to break us up into some smaller groups to discuss this concept and this topic. And what I did is I posed a question really focused on the problems that we've talked about a little bit, and I think there was a lot of interest in that. But I'm interested in folks breaking into smaller groups and sharing with each other some best practices and some ideas about how you currently go about validating problems and solutions for your customers. What are some techniques that you use for validating, or how would you like to? What are some ideas that you have? Even if it's not a practice that you've used, what's a thought that you've had or an idea that you have for a creative way, especially in the time of COVID where we've got a lot more remote work going on? How can you go about validating those problems and the solutions, sometimes with customers, sometimes without? Try not to constrain yourself. We recorded this at our weekly Product Coffee virtual meetup, and I would love to have you join me and some amazing product professionals from around the world every week. If you'd like that, jump over to productcoffee.com and sign up for our newsletter. I'll send out an invitation every Monday telling you how you can log on and join us. And if you love what we're doing here, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the like button, and share it with your colleagues. Links to all the articles we talked about today are in the comments below and at the resources page at www.productcoffee.com/resources. And thanks to bensound.com for the great intro and exit music. Until next time, thanks for watching and have a great day.